A rich man forces a simple woman to play piano, intending to mock her in front of his elite guests. The smirk on his face turns to shock when her fingers touch the keys. No one expected what happened next, when talent collided with arrogance in an unforgettable evening. Isabel Morrison tucked a strand of auburn hair behind her ear as she organized the music sheets for tonight's gala. At 30, she'd spent the last 5 years working as an event coordinator for Winthrop Entertainment, burying her past as a concert pianist. The elegant cream dress she wore, her nicest, felt restrictive compared to her usual practical attire, but tonight's charity gala demanded a certain appearance. "Ms. Morrison, Mr. Winthrop wants all staff in the ballroom in 15 minutes, her colleague whispered, hurrying past with an armful of programs. Isabel nodded, her stomach tightening. The famous Cornelius Winthrop, whose mansion she'd been working in for 3 days preparing this charity gala, was known for his ruthless personality and impossible standards. 3 event coordinators had been fired in the past month alone. "Just get through tonight," she murmured to herself, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her dress. 5 years ago, she'd abandoned her promising career after a disastrous performance at Carnegie Hall. Panic had overwhelmed her fingers freezing mid-concerto. The critics had been merciless. Now, she organized events where others performed, staying safely in the shadows. The grand piano in the ballroom's center gleamed under crystal chandeliers. Isabel ran her fingers along its edge before pulling away quickly. Some wounds were still too fresh. "The pianist has called in sick," her supervisor announced, appearing suddenly beside her with a panicked expression. "Mr. Winthrop is furious. The guests arrive in an hour, and the entire program is centered around the musical performance." Isabel's heart raced. "Has anyone called the agency for a replacement?" "Too late for that. Someone's going to have to tell him, and since you're handling the entertainment portion." The supervisor's voice trailed off meaningfully. "Great. The messenger to be shot." "I'll speak with him," Isabel said, straightening her shoulders. She'd dealt with difficult personalities before. This was just another wealthy client with unreasonable expectations. As if summoned by their fears, Cornelius Winthrop appeared in the doorway, his silver hair and impeccable tuxedo exuding power and privilege. At 60, his face still retained the handsome features that had graced society pages for decades, now hardened by years of getting exactly what he wanted. His cold eyes swept the room before landing on Isabel. "Everything better be perfect," he said, his voice carrying the absolute certainty of a man never told no. Isabel swallowed hard and stepped forward. Tonight was just another event to survive. She had no idea this evening would resurrect everything she'd tried to forget. The Winthrop Mansion was the crown jewel of Westchester County. Marble columns stretched toward ornate ceilings, and priceless artwork adorned walls that had hosted presidents and royalty. In the grand ballroom, where Isabel now stood, 3 crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over the polished floor and the centerpiece. A magnificent Steinway concert, grand piano worth more than Isabel's annual salary. Guests began arriving at precisely 7 o'clock. Women in designer gowns adorned with diamonds floated through the room, while men in tailored tuxedos discussed stock portfolios and vacation homes. Isabel moved efficiently between them, invisible in her role as staff despite her elegant dress. She monitored the waitstaff, checked the lighting levels, and ensured the champagne flowed freely. Everything must be perfect, Cornelius had instructed earlier, his steely gaze boring into her. The annual charity gala was his showcase, less about raising money for underprivileged children, and more about cementing his status among New York's elite. "This event reflects directly on me." Isabel checked her watch for the 5th time in as many minutes. The evening's entertainment should have begun 15 minutes ago. The string quartet had played their intended opening set, and now an uncomfortable lull had settled over the gathering. She glanced at the empty piano bench and felt a familiar ache in her fingers, quickly suppressed. "Is there a problem, Ms. Morrison?" The cold voice of Cornelius Winthrop cut through her thoughts. He had appeared beside her silently, a flute of champagne held loosely in manicured fingers. "The pianist, sir. He's ill and won't be coming." She delivered the news with professional calm, bracing for the explosion. Cornelius's jaw tightened, the only visible sign of his anger. "Unacceptable. I have 70 of New York's most influential people here expecting a program." This reflects poorly on your organization. We've tried calling replacements, but on such short notice, I don't pay your company to bring me problems, he interrupted, ice in his voice. I pay for solutions. Should I be looking for a more competent events team for next quarter? Guests were beginning to murmur, glancing expectantly toward the piano. A few checked their watches. Isabel could feel the event she'd worked tirelessly to perfect beginning to unravel. Perhaps we could move directly to dinner, she suggested, frantically calculating whether the kitchen could accommodate the schedule change. Cornelius looked at her with cold calculation, as if seeing her, really seeing her, for the first time. Number? We'll find another way to entertain my guests. He turned and strode toward the center of the room, leaving Isabel with a sense of impending doom. Cornelius Winthrop claimed the room's attention with a simple raised hand. The crowd, trained in the social choreography of wealth, fell silent immediately. Conversations suspended mid-sentence, champagne glasses paused mid-sip. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice carrying effortlessly across the ballroom, "it seems our pianist has inconsiderately fallen ill." He delivered the news as if the musician had deliberately sabotaged his event. However, the evening won't be without music. Isabel moved toward the service exit, hoping to slip away and frantically call every musician in their contact list. The slight smile playing on Cornelius's lips should have warned her, but she was focused on salvaging the event. "Ms. Morrison, I believe you can help us." She froze mid-step, turning slowly to face him. "Sir? Come, come." He beckoned her with manicured fingers. "Don't be modest." Confused, Isabel approached. The guests parted, creating a path to the grand piano at the center of the room. Whispers followed her. "Who is she? Is she the backup entertainment? Rather plain, isn't she? I happened to notice your resume when we were selecting event coordinators," Cornelius continued, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Juilliard graduate, weren't you?" Isabel felt the blood drain from her face. Her past, the one she'd so carefully hidden, exposed in front of New York's elite. She'd deliberately omitted her musical background from recent applications, listing only her management experience. "That was a long time ago, Mr. Winthrop," she said quietly, aware of every eye in the room on her. "Nonsense," he replied, his voice tinged with challenge. "Talent doesn't simply disappear, does it? I believe in utilizing all available resources." He gestured toward the piano. The massive Steinway gleamed beneath the chandeliers, both inviting and threatening. Isabel hadn't touched a piano in front of an audience in 5 years, not since that night at Carnegie Hall, when her promising career had imploded in 7 devastating minutes. "I'm sure our guests would appreciate even an amateur performance," he added, emphasizing amateur with subtle cruelty. "Something simple to tide us over until dinner." The room's atmosphere shifted. Isabel recognized what was happening. She wasn't being offered an opportunity. She was being served up as entertainment of a different sort. Cornelius Winthrop expected her to fail spectacularly, providing his guests with an amusing story to share at their next social gathering. "I couldn't possibly," she began, struggling to maintain her composure. "I insist," he replied, the words pleasant but his eyes cold. "Unless you'd prefer to find another position tomorrow? Your company values our contract, I'm sure." The threat hung in the air between them, disguised as professional courtesy, but unmistakable in its intent. "Well, Ms. Morrison," Cornelius's voice carried a hint of triumph, "surely you can manage a simple piece for our guests. Consider it part of your duties this evening." 70 pairs of eyes fixed on Isabel. Women with perfect blowouts and men with Rolex watches stared. Cocktails paused midway to their lips, anticipating the spectacle Cornelius had orchestrated. A woman in a sapphire gown whispered something behind her hand, causing her companion to smile indulgently. Isabel recognized the trap. If she refused, she'd lose her job. If she played poorly, she'd become the evening's joke, the help who presumed talent she didn't possess. Either way, Cornelius would have his entertainment at her expense. "Perhaps something easy," he suggested, his voice dripping with false generosity. "A nursery rhyme, maybe? Chopsticks?" A few titters rippled through the crowd, primarily from those standing closest to their host, eager to align themselves with his power. Isabel's cheeks burned. 5 years of hiding her past, of rebuilding her life brick by brick after her public failure, and now this man would tear it all down for his amusement. She glanced toward her supervisor, who stood by the wall looking apologetic but unwilling to intervene. "The piano is quite expensive," Cornelius added. "A Steinway concert grand, imported from Germany specifically for my collection. I hope your talents are worthy of it." She glanced at the instrument. Even from where she stood, she could tell it was perfectly tuned, its ebony surface reflecting the chandelier light like a dark mirror. The professional part of her mind calculated its value at over $150,000. Something shifted inside her, not just anger at Cornelius's cruelty, but a deeper emotion. Grief for what she'd given up, for the music she'd abandoned out of fear. Her fingers suddenly ached with the phantom memory of Chopin, Bach, Liszt, composers whose works had once flowed through her as naturally as breathing. "What would you like me to play, Mr. Winthrop?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. He raised an eyebrow, perhaps surprised by her compliance. "Surprise us. Though don't be too ambitious. We wouldn't want another incident, would we?" Another wave of polite laughter from his guests. The subtle reference to her Carnegie Hall disaster landed like a slap. How much did he know? Had he researched her specifically for this moment? Isabel stepped toward the piano, her cream dress catching the light. The crowd parted, creating a path to her moment of reckoning. As she approached the bench, memories flooded back, thousands of hours of practice, competitions won and lost, the joy of losing herself in the music until her fingers bled. And then, the memory she tried hardest to suppress, the moment her mind had gone blank, when the music had stopped, and the horrified silence of the audience had become her nightmare. Isabel's hand trembled as she reached for the piano bench. The polished wood gleamed under the chandeliers, waiting like a judgment seat. For a brief moment, she considered walking away. Losing her job would be painful. But wasn't this public humiliation worse? She could feel her heart hammering against her ribs, her breathing becoming shallow, the familiar precursors to panic. As she sat down, the cool ivory keys stretched before her, a battlefield of black and white. The familiar tension knotted between her shoulder blades. Her mind flashed back to that night at Carnegie Hall, the lights too bright, her breath too short, the pressure crushing her until her fingers froze mid-movement, leaving only devastating silence. Perhaps something from The Sound of Music, Cornelius suggested from somewhere behind her, eliciting more chuckles. "Those notes are numbered, aren't they? Even someone with minimal training could manage that." Isabel closed her eyes. The room seemed to spin slightly, the murmurs of the wealthy audience turning into the roar of blood in her ears. 5 years she'd spent running from this moment. 5 years pretending that music was just a hobby she'd outgrown, rather than the passion that had been shattered. Her fingers hovered over the keys, trembling visibly. Someone coughed, a champagne glass clinked. Each second of hesitation confirmed what Cornelius wanted to prove, that she was an imposter, a pretender, someone reaching beyond her station. "We're waiting, Ms. Morrison," Cornelius prodded, his voice carrying both impatience and satisfaction. "Our guests have busy schedules." Isabel took a deep breath. Behind her closed eyes, she saw her mother, a cleaning woman who had worked extra shifts to pay for piano lessons, who had believed in her talent even when they couldn't afford heat in their small apartment. She remembered her teacher at Juilliard who had said, "When you play, Isabel, you speak truths others can only stammer." She opened her eyes. The keys waited, patient as old friends. What would she play? Something simple to survive the moment, or... Her left hand dropped to the lower register, her right poised above the middle keys. The choice was made. If this was to be her execution, she would not go meekly. "Liszt," someone in the crowd murmured as they recognized her position. "Is she attempting Liszt?" A woman in pearls whispered, "Surely not La Campanella. That's for virtuosos." Cornelius's smile faltered slightly as he registered the meaning of these whispers. He'd expected "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star," not one of the most technically demanding pieces in the classical repertoire. Isabel took one final breath and surrendered to what she had been running from for 5 years. Whatever happened next would be on her terms, not his. The first notes of Liszt's La Campanella rippled through the ballroom like stones dropped in still water. Isabel's fingers moved with deliberate precision, beginning the deceptively simple melody that would soon erupt into one of the most technically challenging pieces in piano literature. The initial notes were like tentative steps onto thin ice, testing whether it would hold her weight. But as the familiar pattern engaged her muscle memory, something awakened within her. The years of avoidance and fear began to melt away, replaced by the pure instinct of her training. When the piece accelerated, requiring impossible leaps across octaves, her hands became a blur. The notorious right-hand jumps that had defeated countless pianists flowed from her fingers as naturally as breathing. Notes cascaded, each one crystalline and perfect, building the frenetic, bell-like sound that gave the piece its name. Isabel was no longer in Cornelius Winthrop's mansion. She was everywhere and nowhere, lost in the mathematics and emotion of Liszt's genius. Her body swayed slightly, her face transformed by the intensity of concentration and release. This wasn't just technical precision, this was artistry at its most raw and honest. The room had gone completely silent. No clinks of glasses, no whispered conversations, not even breathing could be heard above the torrent of music pouring from the Steinway. The wealthy guests stood transfixed, cocktails forgotten in their hands, as they witnessed something many had paid hundreds of dollars for at Lincoln Center, but had never seen this intimately. A musician in full communion with a masterpiece. Cornelius himself had frozen near a marble column, his expression transformed from smug anticipation to stunned disbelief. He'd intended to showcase her mediocrity, and instead had unwittingly provided a stage for brilliance. As the piece raced toward its frenzied conclusion, Isabel's fingers danced across the keyboard in brilliant arpeggios and chromatic scales, each note distinct yet flowing into the next. Her hands crossed and recrossed, executing the treacherous technical demands with a grace that belied their difficulty. Sweat beaded on her forehead, but her concentration never wavered. The final notes, demanding and triumphant, rang out and then dissolved into silence. The last vibrations hung in the air like visible things, reluctant to fade. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Isabel remained still, her hands finally at rest above the keys, her breath coming in small gasps. The silence was complete, entirely unlike the horrified quiet of her Carnegie Hall disaster. This silence was reverence. The spell was broken only when an elderly man in the back dropped his champagne glass, the crystal shattering against the marble floor. No one turned to look. All eyes remained on Isabel, the simple event coordinator who had just revealed herself to be something else entirely. She finally looked up, meeting Cornelius's stunned gaze across the room, allowing herself one moment of quiet vindication. The silence lasted precisely 3 seconds before the room erupted. Applause crashed like a wave, startling in its intensity. Women in designer gowns pressed manicured hands together with genuine enthusiasm. Men who discussed billion-dollar deals with bored expressions now wore faces of astonishment. Isabel remained seated, her hands now resting in her lap, her breathing still uneven from the exertion of Liszt's punishing composition. She hadn't planned to play La Campanella. It had simply flowed from her fingers, her body remembering what her mind had tried to forget. A woman in a red gown near the front whispered audibly to her companion, "That's Isabel Morrison. She was destined for greatness before she disappeared from the classical scene. I saw her at Carnegie Hall that night." Isabel flinched, so someone had recognized her, had witnessed her greatest humiliation. She braced herself for the whispers to shift from admiration to remembrance of her failure. "Extraordinary," an older gentleman said, approaching the piano with the confident stride of someone accustomed to power. "Simply extraordinary. I'm on the board at the Philharmonic. We must talk. Where have you been hiding?" Others began to press forward, the invisible barrier between staff and guests suddenly dissolved by her performance. Business cards appeared from inner pockets. Questions flowed from all directions. "Do you perform regularly? Are you teaching currently? Would you consider a private engagement at my daughter's wedding? My foundation sponsors a recital series." Even the waitstaff had paused, trays of hors d'oeuvres tilted precariously as they stared at their colleague with newfound respect. Her supervisor's mouth hung slightly open, champagne forgotten in her hand. Only then did Isabel dare to look for Cornelius Winthrop. He stood exactly where she'd left him, his posture rigid, his expression impossible to read. The smug smile had vanished, replaced by something complex. Shock certainly, perhaps anger, and something else that might have been respect. Their eyes met across the crowd now surrounding her. For a moment, the room seemed to fall away, leaving just the two of them in silent acknowledgement. He had intended to humiliate her, to reinforce the hierarchy between them. Instead, she had revealed herself as his equal, perhaps even his superior, in a realm he couldn't touch. He gave her the slightest nod, almost imperceptible, before turning away. It wasn't an apology, but it was an acknowledgement. From a man like Cornelius Winthrop, that was significant. "Darling, you must play something else," urged a diamond-draped woman, breaking the moment. "Chopin, perhaps? His ballade in G minor?" Isabel turned back to the piano, a smile tugging at her lips. For the first time in 5 years, her fingers itched to create music again. The fear that had paralyzed her for so long seemed to have dissolved in the aftermath of Liszt's notes. "The ballade in G minor it is," Isabel announced, her voice steady now. As she began Chopin's haunting masterpiece, she felt a freedom she'd forgotten existed. Each phrase flowed with emotional authenticity, the technically demanding passages serving the music rather than her ego. From the corner of her eye, she noticed Cornelius standing alone by the French doors, watching her with an intensity that might have unsettled her earlier. Now, lost in Chopin's storytelling, she was untouchable. The narrative of the ballade unfolded beneath her fingers, tender in moments, thunderous in others, always emotionally truthful. When the final chords of the ballade resounded through the ballroom, the audience erupted again, more enthusiastically than before. This wasn't polite applause. This was recognition of exceptional artistry. As she stood to acknowledge their response, a distinguished older woman with perfectly coiffed silver hair approached her. "Ms. Morrison, I'm Eleanor Harbrook of the Westchester Arts Foundation. We've been searching for a new artistic director for our piano competition. After tonight's performance, I believe you're exactly who we need." Before Isabel could respond, others crowded around, offering cards, making proposals. The gravity in the room had shifted. These elite New Yorkers now orbited her. Across the room, Cornelius's assistant director approached him, speaking urgently. Isabel caught fragments. "Viral on social media already. 3 guests streaming the performance. Manhattan Classical Review editor was here." Cornelius nodded curtly before making his way toward Isabel. The crowd parted for him automatically, power recognizing power. "Ms. Morrison," he said, his tone carefully modulated. "It seems I misunderstood your qualifications." No apology, but from a man like Cornelius Winthrop, this was the closest thing to one. "It seems you did," she replied simply. A flash of something, irritation, respect, crossed his face before he regained his composure. "I would like to discuss the possibility of you performing at our autumn gala as well, as the featured artist, naturally." His words were smooth, his recovery swift. Already he was repositioning himself as her patron rather than her tormentor. Isabel considered him, this man who had intended to make her a punchline, and was now trying to claim credit for discovering her. She thought of all the times powerful men had directed her path, professors who insisted on their interpretation, conductors who dismissed her questions, critics who judged her worth based on a single performance. "I'll have my agent contact you," she said, surprising herself with the words. "My schedule fills quickly." She turned back to Eleanor Harbrook, leaving Cornelius momentarily speechless, perhaps for the first time in his privileged life. "About the artistic director position," Isabel said. "I'd love to hear more." 2 months later, Isabel sat in her new office at the Westchester Arts Foundation, reviewing applications for the upcoming Young Pianist competition. A framed news article hung on the wall. Viral sensation. The Cinderella pianist of Winthrop Gala returns to spotlight. The article detailed her unexpected comeback, diplomatically omitting the circumstances that had led to her performance. The night that had begun as her humiliation had transformed into her renaissance. Videos of her performance had spread across social media, accumulating millions of views. Former colleagues from Juilliard had reached out. Her agent, yes, she had an agent now, fielded daily requests for performances and interviews. Her first official concert since that disastrous night at Carnegie Hall was scheduled for next month. The tickets had sold out in under an hour. A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. "Ms. Morrison, your 4 o'clock is here," her assistant announced, poking her head in. Isabel smiled. "Send her in, please." A girl of about 12 entered, clutching sheet music, her eyes widening at the baby grand piano in the corner of Isabel's office. Unlike the opulent Steinway at Winthrop's mansion, this was a modest instrument, but it produced a warm, inviting tone. "You must be Lucia," Isabel said warmly. "I understand you're interested in our scholarship program." The girl nodded shyly. "Yes, ma'am. My mom cleans houses, but she says music is important. I practice on a keyboard at the community center." Isabel's heart contracted, recognizing her younger self in this child. "Well, let's hear what you can do." As Lucia approached the piano, Isabel noticed her worn shoes and carefully mended dress. The girl's hands, however, moved with natural grace as she began a simple Mozart sonata. Her technique was unpolished, but showed remarkable intuition. "Some people thought I didn't belong at the piano either," Isabel said after Lucia finished. "They were wrong." The girl looked up, hope dawning in her eyes. "We start lessons next week," Isabel decided. "The scholarship is yours." Later, driving home, Isabel passed the Winthrop mansion on the hill, its windows glowing with warm light against the twilight sky. Cornelius had sent flowers after the gala, along with an offer to fund a concert series with her as the centerpiece. She had declined politely. Some bridges weren't meant to be rebuilt. She thought of Lucia's face when the girl realized her dreams weren't impossible after all. That was the true power of music, not in society galas or viral videos, but in its ability to transform lives from the inside out. Isabel had been forced to the piano by a man's cruelty, but she had reclaimed it through her own courage. Some talents can't remain hidden forever, and some lights refuse to be extinguished, no matter how long they've been covered. Her fingers tapped the steering wheel, already composing tomorrow's possibilities. If this story stirred something within you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more tales that remind us to never underestimate the power of hidden talents. Where are you watching from today? Let us know in the comments below. Remember, sometimes our greatest strengths emerge when others try to reveal our weaknesses. Perhaps you have a talent waiting to be rediscovered. The most beautiful symphonies often come from those who once believed their music was silenced forever. Join us next time for another story of unexpected triumph that will warm your heart.